Well, greetings fellow dwarfers, welcome back to one of my episode breakdowns. Today, Series 2, Episode 3, the brilliant and highly rated Thanks for the Memory. Yep, it's one of the biggies today. This is always one of the top episodes on the Pearl Poll. Loads of cool sci-fi ideas in here, lots of character background, lots of confusing canon, so there's plenty to discuss. Let's dive in and have a look. The opening gag for this week is about being down on supplies and running out of shake and vac. Before we get an additional, with Holly telling us that last week they found a planet with a breathable atmosphere. On that planet we see the Deathday party, with the full crew including Holly and the skutters partying along. With this being a party to celebrate the anniversary of Rimmer's death, everybody, including the cat, is being surprisingly nice to Rimmer. Perhaps they're just really pleased to have an excuse for a party and an excuse to do something different for a change. Rimmer himself is in a strange hologram projection cage. This was the initial idea for how to show Rimmer outside of the ship. It's kind of a strange one, this one. It's a bit like he's a weird cage dancer at a rave, but it's something we only see in this episode, as it was just so limiting for the writers and the crew and everybody, so limiting to have Rimmer stuck in one spot. It really limits what story you can tell, so we never saw the cage again in the future. Which of course throws up a few questions for continuity in canon, given that just 2 episodes earlier in Crichton he managed to go on board Blue Midget and then go on to the Nova 5 without the need for any sort of projection cage. So I think we can take it that the Nova 5 must have had the same hologram projection capability. And as for how come he never needs this cage in the future, well, we can come up with our own theories on that. I'm taking it that the planet that they're dancing on here had some sort of strange, strong magnetic field or radiation or something like that that might have interfered with getting a decent signal to project Rimmer's hologram, something that they didn't need to deal with much in the future. That's how I'm seeing it, that they don't need the cage from here on in. Alternatively, I've heard Rob Grant kind of joke around in the recent quarantine commentaries that it was just Rimmer got upgraded a bit later and his light bead got upgraded, so it wasn't necessary. Both explanations work for me. Now, this was actually filmed on an old rubbish dump where they'd done some land reclamation and apparently had a rather unpleasant smell to the entire place. This was in Wales, and at the time, very famously, Craig Charles's son was being born, so it was a little bit awkward for filming. There is some behind the scenes stuff of Craig Charles getting increasingly agitated as the day went along, getting rather worried about missing the birth of his son. Eventually he did have to be whisked off in a car to get him to London for the birth, which unfortunately he was 20 minutes late for. Ouch. The later scenes of the guys burying the black box were also done on the same location, but as Craig Charles had to leave, once they put the helmets on and you couldn't see who was in the spacesuits, it was the floor manager Mike Agnew who had to step into a spacesuit and take over the part. And we get some famous continuity errors for that, which we'll come to in a bit. So as mentioned, this is location filming, but they very cleverly blended in different shots from the miniatures to give them the cool space background and Blue Midget. And I actually think, for the time, 1989, they did a great job. It looks really good. In the remastered version, they replaced the Blue Midget with the version from Series 8 using some very sketchy 1990s CGI. It's cool to see the mobile version of Holly again, which we saw in the previous episode Better Than Life. And I always laugh at seeing Lister kind of air guitaring or miming, but using a real guitar. I love how Chris Barry portrays drinking the hollow drinks, something we saw, or didn't see because they're kind of invisible, back in the episode Me Squared when he thinks he's going to get deleted. Lister shows that he's made a spanner cake because Rimmer was a technician, and we get the brilliant Holly joke of, it's lucky he wasn't a gynecologist. It's also good to see that all that chef's exam training that Lister put himself through back in Balance of Power didn't all go to waste. In the deleted scenes, there's an extra bit of dialogue of Rimmer talking about serving at the officers' ball before being, well, basically sexually abused by the officers, which he sounds pretty damn pleased about, as he saw it as the first rung on the ladder to joining the ridiculous sounding Space Masons, a kind of Mickey Takes sci-fi version of the real world Masons. Eventually the boys head back to Red Dwarf in the Blue Midget, which Lister drunkenly drives forwards, backwards and all around. As mentioned, the remastered version replaces the Blue Midget ship with the version from Series 8 using CGI. Now I have to admit they did kind of a good job here, in that they have the ship stagger around on its legs like the ship is drunk. I kind of like this effect actually, it did make me chuckle. Yeah, for one of the remastered changes with the ropey CGI, that's not a bad change, it did make me smile. Once they get back to Red Dwarf, there was a deleted scene of the guys staggering back to the bunk room, with Rimmer so hollow drunk that he actually has to crawl along the floor. In the bunk room we get a classic, legendary Rimmer and Lister chatting scene in the bunk room, with Lister first sharing his drunken food delight of the chili chutney sandwich, before the conversation leads to Rimmer talking about how Lister was so much more liked than himself. Finally, we get the fantastic revelation that Rimmer only made love once to Yvonne Magruder for 12 minutes, including the time it took to eat the pizza. We met an artificial reality version of Yvonne in the previous episode, Better Than Life. And if you go check out the Red Dwarf novels, particularly Identity Within, there's a whole bigger, much more expanded backstory for Yvonne, where sleeping with Rimmer she actually got pregnant and then went off and had his son and didn't die in the radiation leak. It's actually a really cool story, but it needs definitely its own episode to break down that book. Now, Rimmer talking about his first experience of making love would kind of get contradicted a few episodes later in Series 3 in the episode Marooned, where Rimmer would instead talk about his first time making love being in the back of his brother's Bentley convertible. Although Rimmer in Marooned is very sketchy on the details, being far more interested in the car than the actual time with the girl, so perhaps he's just referring to his first time making out with a girl rather than his first time actually making love, which would therefore not contradict it being Yvonne Magruder. Rimmer sings a few lines of his I'm a Little Lamb song and eventually goes to bed, sad and depressed about having prioritised his career over his personal life, while Dave continues with a little bit more of his jigsaw puzzle before leaving the bunk room. We get a ship flyby, followed by Rimmer jumping out of bed and, to his horror, remembering the embarrassing drunken conversation. Knowing that this all occurred after they wiped their memories, it's funny that they never bothered to delete the drunken conversation as well. Lister wakes up in agony as his foot is in a plaster cast. The jigsaw's been completed, Holly's star chart has been messed about with, the cat's foot is also broken, 4 pages have been torn out of Dave's diary, and the clock says it's Thursday. Unsurprisingly, Rimmer tries to blame it all on aliens, and he comes up with his brilliant hello to you speech, trying to explain things away. And by the way, if you guys are enjoying what you're seeing so far, then hit subscribe and hit like down below so that you don't miss anything in the future and so that I know that you're enjoying things. Thanks guys. Holly realises that they can trace the missing black box by the signal that it gives off, which kind of makes the whole point of them bothering to bury it on a planet somewhere somewhat redundant. The boys head back out in the Blue Midget to search for the black box, with the cat and Lister having to don spacesuits and take an excursion onto a moon to go find it. Here we get the episode's famous continuity nightmare, with Craig Charles having been whisked away to his son's birth. Floor manager Mike Agnew took over, however, the fake plaster cast leg didn't fit particularly well on his foot and was causing him a lot of pain. So in some shots it's on the wrong foot, some shots it's missing altogether. So we end up with this continuity nightmare of him having a broken leg, not having a broken leg, having a wrong broken leg. Oh dear, it's not great for continuity and not great for canon. And to be honest, it's such a biggie and so visual on screen, even I'm not going to try and attempt to explain it away. It just is what it is. I think we'll just have to not try and explain it off and just accept it for the cock-up that it is. Or alternatively, we could take director Ed By's comical explanation.
Somebody tackled me about this at one of the conventions, Red Dwarf conventions, and I was about to apologise for it, and he went, no, I know why you did it. And I said, what? I know why you switched the broken leg from one leg to the other. And I went, why? He said, because you were seeing that in a flashback, so it was a mirror. And I went, yes, that's right. Well done for noticing. And I walked away.
While they're doing all this, Rimmer is watching from Blue Midget on one of the screens, and we get the joke about the quality of the video being terrible. It's like watching Spanish television. A joke that was removed on the remastered version, presumably because they wanted to show this in Spain without causing offence. Once Lister and the cat get back on Blue Midget, they check out the data on the black box. There's a pre-recorded message of Holly telling them to not check anything out, to ignore it, and don't watch what's on there, which only the present Holly bothers to acknowledge. The rest of the guys just want to continue on. So they begin to watch the CCTV of what happened over the previous few days that they can't remember. I really like how the show does this part actually. It transitions from watching everything on a black and white monitor to being full screen black and white, then blending into full colour but still saying replay on screen before just becoming normal footage. I really like how it transitions into this. There's the fun little joke of Lister silently telling the cat how many times Rimmer actually made love, before we dive full on into the footage, as the cat and Dave are shown heading to the hologram projection suite. Quite clearly, for this episode, it's a temporary set, built out of the ye olde Red Dwarf favourite, packing crates. But I really like how it works here, and it's great to see those famous packing crates being used. As they go into the hologram projection room, they get to see what Rimmer's dreaming about, and it's that terrible song from earlier, but done in this strange, dreamy, karaoke voice, with Rimmer performing on stage badly and out of tune, in just his boxer shorts. Yeah, it's all a bit weird, but then again, dreams are weird, so it's quite accurate in some ways. Dave records his memory in comedy quick time, and explains to the cat that he's giving Rimmer his love affair with Lisa Yates. We see a brief scene of Dave and Lisa Yates together, and Dave adjusts the memory to have Arnold's voice and his name. Although Lisa switches from calling Dave by his first name to calling Arnold by his second. I'd struggle to call that much of a continuity error, to be honest, especially given the other ones we've seen in the episode, but I'd struggle to call this much of a continuity error, as pretty much everybody on ship always refers to Arnold as Rimmer as his second name, so given that it's Lister typing in the changes, he probably just typed in, call him Rimmer. The memories then transition into a dream for Rimmer as he remembers, or thinks he remembers, his love affair with Lisa Yates. Apparently Craig Charles and Chris Barry had a falling out over the way that Chris Barry was pretending to beat Craig Charles here. Apparently this caused a bit of friction and a bit of a falling out. Once Rimmer wakes up after his dream, he's in a better mood than we've ever seen him on the show before. Lister comes into the room and begins tackling his hangover head on by cracking open yet another beer. Mind you, I suppose he hasn't actually been to sleep yet, so the party's still going for Dave. We get a great, funny, and really clever and poignant conversation between Lister and Rimmer, with Arnold talking about his memories of Lisa, his new memories, while Lister keeps joining in and adding bits of detail, accidentally giving too much detail from Rimmer's point of view, as it's stuff Lister shouldn't be able to know. Quite cleverly, this scene doesn't just focus on the positive sides of the love affair, but also on the negatives, with Arnold unknowingly acting as a bit of a mirror for Dave to see how he foolishly ended one of the best relationships he ever had, and perhaps didn't treat the best girlfriend he'd ever had very well at all. Lister then goes on to over-enthusiastically proclaim how fantastic the sex was, before we cut back to the guys in real time watching the CCTV recordings in Blue Midget, with the cat enjoying the show whilst Rimmer is completely cut up. Back on board Red Dwarf, in the footage, Rimmer bursts in on the bunk room and confronts Lister, having found details about Lisa in Dave's diary. The two guys reading each other's diaries would become a big plot element in the next episode, Stasis Leak. After Arnold comically compares aspects of the two relationships with Lisa, Lister confesses that the memories were really his and that Arnold had never even known Lisa Yates. And we get a line that would later challenge continuity, with Rimmer mentioning how he had conflicting memories about being adopted, and then the important line about him thinking it was odd that he had his appendix out twice, implying of course that Dave, whilst dating Lisa Yates, must have had to have his appendix out. However, in the later episode Legion himself pulls out Dave's infected appendix, which doesn't make sense for continuity because, from what Rimmer's saying, Dave must have had his appendix removed 3 million years earlier whilst dating Lisa. So that one really does challenge continuity a bit. Mind you, they've been through so many parallel universes, strange timeline changes, mix-ups, things with the Inquisitor. I suppose there's every opportunity for the past to have been changed quite significantly and Dave to still have his appendix. I might have to do my own theory on that one. We then get another great, tender observation dome scene, like in Better Than Life, where the guys discuss the pain of broken relationships. It's really tender, it does that great thing of comedy where bits are funny, but the comedy kind of sets up stuff that's tender and heartfelt to be even more tender and heartfelt than many dramas can manage. It's a really great scene. I love these observation dome bits. Eventually the guys agree to wipe their memories and forget all about it, as well as the Cat and Holly's memories, and then to bury the ship's black box. In the remastered version of this scene, they added some planets passing behind Rimmer's head, which is, to be honest, somewhat distracting. We then finally get to tie up all the final mysteries of the episode, with the broken legs and huge footprints we saw earlier being explained as the guys dropping the gravestone that Lister insisted on putting above the black box. Back on Red Dwarf, Lister rips out some more of his diary pages and then heads off to go wipe their memories again, before popping in the final piece of that Red Dwarf jigsaw, which incidentally, I really want one of those. The episode then ends with what is actually a really cool 3D effect for a TV show in 1989, with the closing credits starting as the frame of film on the jigsaw. It's actually a really cool effect as it pops up and fills the screen. And there we have it. That's the episode, Thanks for the Memory. A really clever episode. Lots of really good sci-fi, lots of really cool stuff to do with psychology in there. It's a really, really clever one. Now, there's some fun stuff if you want to go look around the internet for it. There's an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called Clues, where almost the same plot is kind of shown, and people have made a lot of comparisons between the two. I very much doubt it's plagiarism, but it's very interesting to go look at Clues, where the crew wake up and a few days of their memories have gone for some strange reason. So yeah, fun comparison to make. I'd be very surprised if it's plagiarism, but might be worth checking out. And as for that interesting stuff about Rimmer saying that his first time making love was with Yvonne Magruder, but in Series 3 Marooned, he says it was in the back of a car. Yes, I think we can explain that as the time in the back of the car was just him making out, not him fully making love. But it's interesting that on the subject of the memory wipes, the second time they wiped their memories at the very end of the episode, maybe Dave did wipe a lot more, because in the episode Marooned, he asks Rimmer how he lost his virginity. Well, he wouldn't have needed to bother asking if he just remembered what happened here. But obviously he couldn't remember Rimmer telling him how he first made love. So it's an interesting one. Did they wipe more memory the second time around? Well, there you go, guys. That's my breakdown of the episode. Thanks for the memory. I really enjoyed this one. It's a very great, very top rated episode. Definitely in my top 10. What do you guys think? Is it your top 10? Is it your top 5? Is it your number 1? Let me know in the comments down below, and let me know anything I've missed so that other people can read it and learn some more. Guys, thank you so much for watching one of my episode breakdowns. I've got more stuff coming out all the time, so hit subscribe if you haven't done so already. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you next time, Smegheads.